San Antonio, Texas, summer 1841. In the dim light of dawn, 35 horsemen, 20 Mexican citizens and 15 Texas Rangers are preparing for the ride ahead. Their mission is one of revenge, born out of the many losses they have suffered. In the spring of 1841, Comanche raiders struck throughout the region, killing settlers, burning homes, and driving off cattle and horses. This violence was part of the broader conflict between Texas and the Comanche, a group whose raids had terrorized the southern plains for decades. The Comanche had long been a dominant force, using their mastery of the horse to launch raids deep into enemy territory, striking swiftly and devastatingly. Despite the fragile relationship between Texas and Mexico, the Rangers, along with their Mexican allies and Lipan Apache guides, joined forces for this shared mission. United by their common enemy, they set off to recover stolen livestock and, if necessary, fight to the death. The Rangers are chosen to lead, not only because of their numbers, but due to their extensive experience fighting the Comanche. As the group rides out of San Antonio, they head southwest, tracking the raiders toward Uvalde Canyon, the last known location of the Comanche. Though the Comanche had only existed as a dominant force for a little over a decade, they quickly became a formidable power in central Texas. Early on, only a few groups, like the Texas Rangers and their native guides, had been able to engage the Comanche in their homeland with any success. However, these few victories were rare, and even then, the Comanche's unrelenting raids could not be contained. The brutality of these raids was unprecedented. The Tonkawa, Karankawa, Waco, Apache, and others, all native tribes, along with Spanish settlers and Mexicans, faced a level of violence never before witnessed. Entire communities were destroyed, families were slaughtered, and the Comanche terrorized the region like a storm that would not subside. This was the price of centuries of oppression, where the Comanche had been pushed to the edges of survival by more powerful, established tribes. The Comanche's rise began when they encountered the Spanish and their horses. The introduction of the horse allowed the Comanche to shift the balance of power. They became unparalleled in horsemanship, even developing their own methods of breeding horses to enhance their agility and strength. The horse was key to their dominance, and they became one of the most feared and respected forces in North America. In 1841, the Comanche's tactics were unlike those of any other tribe the American and Mexican forces had encountered. They fought from horseback, using the horse as both a weapon and a means of rapid movement. Their raids were often timed with the full moon, a recurring event so common in central Texas that it became known as a Comanche moon. At night, unsuspecting settlers or rival tribes would be awakened by a whirlwind of violence and terror, and few would survive to tell of the attack. Comanche warriors, traveling long distances from their base camps, sometimes hundreds of miles away, would strike without warning. Their raids were swift and brutal, aimed at taking as much as possible and killing anyone who resisted. Men were typically killed on sight or taken prisoner to be tortured to death as part of the Comanche tradition of retribution and entertainment. Women were captured and enslaved, often enduring cruel fates, both as laborers and for sexual exploitation. Infants were generally killed outright, as their cries and constant care were seen as a liability during fast-moving raids. This cycle of violence became the norm for decades, and despite efforts to stop it, no one had been able to curb the devastation. In the late 18th century, the Spanish general and politician Juan Bautista de Anza brokered a peace deal with the Comanche in New Mexico, but this peace did not extend to the Texas frontier. The relentless raids continued, unchallenged by any significant resistance. Since the founding of San Antonio in 1718, the Spanish had struggled to establish control over the territory north of the city. Their soldiers, settlers, priests, and missions faced violence of unprecedented scale from native tribes, particularly the Comanche, who had become a powerful force. Despite several attempts at control, the Spanish could not stem the tide of destruction that plagued their settlements. By 1821, when Mexico gained independence from Spain under the Treaty of Córdoba, the problem had not improved. Mexico found itself just as helpless against the Comanche as the Spanish had been. The Comanche were not a typical native tribe. They were a formidable empire that had grown stronger over time, especially after their acquisition of horses from the Spanish. This gave them an unmatched advantage over their enemies, and they used their superior horsemanship to conduct seasonal raids that spread terror from San Antonio to the Yucatan Peninsula. The Mexican government, unable to combat the Comanche's strength, decided to establish a buffer zone of Anglo settlers along the Texas frontier. The hope was that these settlers would absorb the brunt of Comanche attacks, sparing the more populous areas of Mexico further destruction. However, this solution failed. The settlers, increasingly dissatisfied with the lack of support from the Mexican government, grew resentful. This frustration boiled over into rebellion, contributing to the Texians' revolt against Mexico. The Texas Revolution, which lasted from October 2, 1835 to April 21, 1836, saw the Texians win their independence. But their victory came with its own challenges, as they were now tasked with defending their new republic against the relentless Comanche raids that spanned from the Gulf of Mexico to modern-day Oklahoma. In response to the threat of Comanche violence, the Mexican government formed mobile light cavalry units to patrol and protect the open Texas frontier. This initiative led to the creation of the Texas Rangers. While the idea of mounted patrols was not new, it took on a distinctive form in Texas in the 1830s. The word ranger first appeared in the 1590s, describing a wanderer or rover. By the 1660s, it evolved to describe mounted men tasked with policing large, unsettled territories. The Texas Rangers, though a new entity in the 1830s, quickly became the stuff of legend. Their deeds, real and exaggerated, filled the pages of newspapers and dime novels, reaching audiences as far as New York and London. In their early days, however, the Rangers faced numerous struggles. Composed mainly of young men, many in their 20s, driven by the desire for adventure and to prove themselves, their force was untested. They fought both Mexican troops and civilians, pursued cattle thieves with ruthless efficiency, and enforced their own brand of frontier justice across the land. Their fame grew, but not without cost. The Rangers were often overwhelmed by the violence they faced and the lack of formal training. The Comanche, more than any other adversary, caused the greatest losses to the Rangers. In the early years of fighting, the fatality rate among the Rangers reached as high as 50%. Those who survived did so only after enduring gruesome wounds and tortures. However, the survivors became more determined and skillful. The harsh lessons learned from witnessing the deaths of their comrades in remote locations only strengthened their resolve. The Rangers adapted quickly, refining their tactics and learning to fight and shoot with precision while on horseback. They developed a relentless efficiency, becoming a highly mobile strike force capable of penetrating deep into enemy territory. The Rangers' weaponry also evolved. What began with simple single-shot pistols gave way to more powerful 5-shot revolvers with reloadable cylinders, which gave them the upper hand in combat. Through years of intensive and brutal fighting, the Rangers had transformed into a Spartan-like group, disciplined, experienced, and driven by the need for survival. Though they were admired by the settlers they protected, in 1841, the Texas Rangers were known as rough men, shaped by the violence of the frontier, and without their role, they would have been out of place in society. The Texas Rangers were a far cry from the formalized military units of the day. They wore whatever was most practical for the harsh, unforgiving Texas frontier. Many Rangers wore buckskin leggings with cotton shirts and wide-brimmed hats, while others preferred a more distinctive look, wearing serapes and coonskin caps. Their clothing was as rough and rugged as the land they patrolled. The Rangers paid little attention to record-keeping or the popular trends of the time. Instead, they were known for their wild, often violent behavior, frequently engaging in drunken brawls where bowie knives and revolvers were common weapons. They were more like modern-day outlaw motorcycle clubs than organized law enforcement, with unkempt hair, long beards, and a rough, coarse manner of speech. Despite their chaotic behavior, the Rangers held a deep loyalty to their leader, Jack Hays. A Tennessean barely 24 years old, Hays earned their respect through his leadership and unyielding determination. Born in Little Cedar Lake, Tennessee, he came from a distinguished military family. his father, Harmon A. Hayes, having fought under Andrew Jackson in the War of 1812. Hayes's natural leadership and military upbringing made him a figure the Rangers would follow despite his youth. Jack Hayes gave his son the middle name Coffee, in honor of John R. Coffee, a family relative who had served as an officer at the Battle of New Orleans. Hayes himself came to Texas in 1836, eager to join the Texas Revolution, but by the time he arrived, the revolution was already over. Instead, he took up the dangerous work of land surveying, arguably one of the most perilous jobs on the frontier at that time. Surveying involved venturing into the vast, open land of the Texas frontier, marking out boundaries for plots that supposedly belonged to the newly formed Republic of Texas. But these lands were not unclaimed. The region to the west of San Antonio and Austin was part of Comancheria, the vast and powerful empire of the Comanche. At its peak, Comancheria dwarfed the size and reach of anything the Texans could hope to claim as their own. For anyone to set foot in Comancheria without the Comanche's explicit permission was to invite certain death. The Comanche, having observed survey parties sent by the Spanish and Mexican governments, understood exactly what these newcomers were trying to do. They had fought off invaders for generations and would not tolerate any trespassers on their land. The surveyors who entered Comancheria were seen as intruders, men who took land from the Comanche to sell to their enemies. Many of these men met brutal ends. Comanche warriors, having long learned the ways of the invaders, would capture surveyors and subject them to painful deaths, staking them to the earth and using burning coals as part of their torture, while mocking their cries. This was a fate that many surveyors, who dared to mark the land for the new settlers, met in the harsh and unforgiving Comanche territory. Jack Hayes, however, was not one to be deterred by these risks. His determination to succeed and his unyielding spirit in the face of such dangers made him one of the few men to navigate the deadly frontier without succumbing to it. The surveyors who ventured into Comancheria were seen as invaders, dividing the land and selling it to the Comanche's enemies. These men often met horrific fates, staked to the earth by Comanche warriors who subjected them to brutal torture, using burning coals as part of their cruel ritual. The Comanche mocked their pain as they slowly perished, a warning to anyone who dared to trespass. Jack Hayes, however, was not one to be intimidated by such dangers. He was recruited into the Texas Rangers for both his demonstrated skills and his military background. Hayes quickly worked his way through the ranks, gaining respect for his toughness and determination. While stationed near San Antonio, he became friends with Flaco, a Lipan Apache chief who had first-hand experience with the Comanche. Through their discussions, Flaco provided Hayes with deep knowledge of Comanche warfare tactics, which were known for their speed, brutality, and strategic complexity, tactics far different from those of the Apache or Waco tribes. The Comanche's tactics were deadly and precise, using a rotating formation of mounted warriors to strike their targets. As each warrior reached the point closest to the target, he would release an arrow before riding to the rear, allowing him time to reload and strike again. Hayes often worked with Chief Flaco, a trusted Lipan Apache leader who provided invaluable insight into the Comanche's methods. With Flaco's guidance, Hayes learned to hunt down raiding parties and engage the Comanche on their own ground, adapting to their brutal combat style. Hayes' reputation grew rapidly, not only among the Texians and Mexicans, but also within the Comanche ranks. The Comanche, recognizing his skill and bravery, called him Captain Jack, Cap'n Yak, meaning too brave, a title given with both respect and fear. His exploits became legendary, and bounties were placed on his head by Comanche war chiefs and Mexican officers alike, who saw him as a relentless adversary and a man difficult to defeat. Hayes was known for his calm and friendly nature in everyday life, but once battle was upon him, he became a different man. Descriptions from both allies and enemies emphasize how his demeanor shifted completely at the sound of the call to arms. His eyes would harden, his posture straighten, and his voice, distinct and steady, would issue commands that carried life-or-death consequences. He was intensely concerned with his men's well-being, yet was willing to risk his own life without hesitation. As arrows and bullets whizzed by and screams echoed through the air, Hayes was undaunted, charging forward, despite the chaos around him. These qualities earned Hayes not only rapid promotions within the Texas Rangers, but the deep loyalty of those he commanded. On one fateful summer morning, Hayes led his band of Rangers and Mexican gunmen west, following the trail of a Comanche raiding party toward the mouth of Uvalde Canyon, just over 80 miles from San Antonio. There, he would lead his men into another fierce confrontation. On July 1st, 1841, Hayes and his men finally caught sight of the Comanche raiding party. Recognizing the importance of the element of surprise, Hayes ordered an immediate assault on the group, about a dozen warriors strong. The Comanche, despite their exceptional combat skills, knew when retreat was the smarter choice in the face of a surprise attack, and often avoided unnecessary confrontations when the odds were against them. This instance proved no different. As Hayes and his Rangers closed in, the Comanche warriors, along with one woman, scattered into the nearby thicket for cover. Hayes, without hesitation, brought his horse to a sudden stop, dismounted, and charged into the thicket with his rifle ready. Two of his fellow Rangers followed him into the dense brush, the three men pushing forward relentlessly as they pursued their quarry into the heart of the thicket. A deadly volley of arrows flies toward the Rangers, most sticking into tree trunks or glancing off branches, but enough find their mark to disrupt the attack. All three Rangers are struck, one grievously wounded, another seriously hurt but still able to fight, and Hayes with a painful, though minor, wound to his finger. Quickly, Hayes assesses the situation. He orders the most seriously injured Ranger to take cover and directs the others still mobile to retreat to safety. After ensuring they are in position, Hayes returns to the thicket, armed with a double-barreled shotgun. His mission: to rescue his critically wounded comrade. Out of the 12 Comanche warriors, only one carries a rifle, while the others wield traditional weapons: bows, arrows, tomahawks, and knives, demonstrating the Comanche's reliance on their traditional combat methods. The Comanche, furious at the interruption of their raid, charged at Hayes and his men. The Rangers, one with a shotgun and the other gravely wounded, were at a disadvantage. Yet, despite their weakness, the Comanche formed a battle line and rushed through the thick underbrush with intent to end the Rangers' resistance. They were used to quick, decisive strikes, and a pair of wounded men in the thicket would normally be no challenge. Hayes, however, had no intention of going down easily. He waited for the perfect moment, watching as the Comanche closed in. When they were within 15 feet of him, he suddenly rose from his position and fired both barrels of his shotgun into the two closest warriors. The sound of the second blast echoed through the thicket, and Hayes swiftly dropped the shotgun, drawing his revolver. The sight of their fallen comrades and the force of the attack were enough to dissuade the Comanche from continuing their assault. They hesitated, giving Hayes the chance he needed to protect his wounded comrade and maintain control of the situation. Seeing his chance, Hayes quickly pulls his wounded comrade to safety, giving orders to the other Rangers to form a perimeter around the thicket and shoot any Comanche trying to escape. With a rifle in hand and freshly loaded revolver cylinders, Hayes rushes back into the thicket, determined to finish what had begun. Hayes returns to the position he had abandoned moments before, the scent of blood and gunpowder still thick in the air. For the next 3 hours, Hayes picks off the Comanche one by one. Wave after wave of attacks are met with precision and speed, as Hayes's rifle and revolver find their marks. Each time a Comanche warrior tries to advance, they are driven back by his relentless fire. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, only 2 figures remain in the thicket: Hayes and a Comanche warrior, along with one woman who was captured during the chaos. The Comanche, once a united band, now lay scattered across the thicket, 10 of their warriors slain in the battle. Just hours earlier, they had shared the warmth of their campfire and the comfort of a meal together. Now, their lifeblood seeped into the Galilee dirt. The last Comanche warrior, realizing he is surrounded and escape is impossible, prepares for his end. He sings his death song, the mournful notes reverberating through the canyon walls, a testament to the Comanche spirit. With a steady mind, he turns to the lone woman who remains with him. He tells her she will be taken prisoner, but must remain strong and conduct herself with honor under the harsh Texian yoke. With a deep breath, He draws an arrow, and knowing his fate is sealed, moves toward Hayes's position. His resolve is unshaken. He will take at least one Texian with him before entering the next world. Hayes, bloodied and covered in dust, has been waiting for this final moment. After taking down the Comanche's comrades, Hayes knew the battle wouldn't end until either he or the last warrior was dead. He hunkered down, listening to the thudding of the warriors' footsteps as they neared. When the warrior came within 15 feet, Hayes rose from his position and aimed his revolver. The Comanche, however, was faster. At the same instant Hayes fired, the Comanche released his arrow. The arrow grazed Hayes' shoulder, knocking him onto his back. Despite the wound, the warrior pressed on, his knife drawn and ready. Hayes, wounded but determined, quickly regained his footing. As the warrior closed in, Hayes emptied his revolver into the Comanche, ending his final attack. The woman was captured, the horses recovered, and the bodies of the fallen Comanche left behind, their remains soon to be scavenged by wolves and coyotes. After his battles with the Comanche, Hayes continued to fight other adversaries, including the Mexican Army, Apache, and Paiute. His reputation as a skilled leader and fighter grew, but his life took a new direction when he moved to San Francisco. There, he became sheriff, overseeing law and order in a rapidly growing city. Hayes also built wealth through ranching and real estate, securing his place as a prominent figure in the community. His legacy extended even to those who had once opposed him, earning their respect until his death. One of the most remarkable acknowledgments of his character came from Comanche chief Buffalo Hump, who sent a golden spoon as a gift for the birth of Hayes's first son. This rare gesture showed the respect Hayes had earned, even from his fiercest enemies. Later in life, Hayes became one of the founding members of Oakland, California. He died at the age of 66 and was laid to rest in Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, leaving behind a legacy of resilience and respect. Despite enduring heavy losses in this battle, the Comanche continued to expand their empire across the southern plains. They remained fierce warriors and ruled the vast lands until the 1870s, when their strength waned under the pressure of relentless U.S. military campaigns and forced relocations. Eventually, they were confined to reservations where they faced poverty, discontent, and the erosion of their culture. The fight for Texas was perhaps the most intense and brutal chapter in the Comanche's long history. More than any other conflict in North America, it was soaked in blood and loss, shaped by constant warfare and resistance. The stories of Comanche triumphs, tragic defeats, and the dreams of freedom they fought for are too numerous to recount fully in a single account. Their decline was a painful chapter in the history of the Southern Plains, but their legacy lives on in the spirits of their descendants.